On some level, we all know that health extends beyond the physical, and to feel well, we need more than pills and a diagnosis. Industrialized medicine is often unable to reach the roots beneath disease and empower us to create our own sense of health and well being.
This is Dr. Dumbass and the Wounded Healer. My name's Ashley Palmer.
And I'm Samuel Simonson.
The system is useful for some things, but frankly, it is overrun with bullshit. The intention of this podcast is to explore other ways to approach life, health, and society at a time when change is inevitable and everywhere.
We may be dreamers,
but the status quo sounds like a status no, man.
This week we spoke with an interesting guest, Mark Leib. He is the founder of Sacred Design Studio, which is a unique consultancy specializing in high-frequency, nature-based environments that optimize healing, harmony, life force, and spiritual connection. His studio creates personalized sanctuaries, holistic architecture, and regenerative communities that are deeply connected to the Earth's biofield and that contribute towards the raising of global consciousness.
So Mark is adept in etheric science, sacred geometry, geobiology, and biophilic design, and is the only certified practitioner of the ancient European tradition of harmonic building in the UK. Enjoy the conversation.
Is it Sam or Samuel?
Either or. Sam is usually what I go by.
Sam. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks for talking with us.
My pleasure.
So when I'm looking at your website, like if I'm understanding it, so it seems like the work that you do has been done for like thousands of years, but not many people are doing it right now. But you're like using the like geometry of the earth and like aligning geometry with shapes and creating like shapes that promote health? Am I like, what is this? What do you do exactly?
Okay. All right. Yeah, almost.
Okay.
Yeah. Has it been done for 1,000 years? Yes, it has. Absolutely. So if you think about like mounds and stone circles and like standing stones and pyramids, all that stuff, all over the planet. There was, I think, when the Europeans arrived in North America, they calculated like 150,000 or more different structures in the land, earthworks and mounds and different structures. We've got thousands of stone circles in the UK and in Europe going back thousands of years. There's working with the land and building structures and building artworks and building structures that were then used for ritual purposes and for calendars to mark time and places to mark places of energy, healing places, places that then devolved into center points of communities and then became cities, has gone on in every culture for millennia. And so there's so much happening now. Now is an amazing time because we have normal people just with the power of the ability to travel and drones and the internet are finding things that mainstream archaeology just hasn't seen or hasn't had the objectivity to see. Um, I'm a designer and I work with a very specific tradition that contains the knowledge and that's been handed down in tradition for thousands of years. So maybe what I do is I'll explain my tradition, and then we can then go back to like go into the details of how geometry heals us and how we can connect with them. So
Sure.
Sounds good.
so I'm a designer. So I'm an interior architect. I've been doing that for like 25 years. So I started designing buildings and hotels and restaurants and cafes and things that were just things to do with life, like great places to eat and good housing and then boats and shops, all that stuff. And then about 15 years ago, I engaged in I'd undertaken martial arts for all of my life, and I'd come back to it many times. And I was living in Sydney about 20 years ago, and I wanted to do more martial arts, but then I had knee injury. I'd had several knee operations, and I tried to do martial art, and the knees were like, nah, it's not happening. So I thought, okay, I need to find something where I can I can continue this deep desire to do martial arts, but I need to heal myself at the same time. So I found a Tai Chi master in the suburbs of Sydney, and I went to him, and um, um, I ended up training in something called Negong. So have you heard of Qigong?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Qigong?
but I'm not sure what it
Yeah.
is.
So Qigong is a bit like pranayama. So prana and Qi. So prana is the Indian name for life force, energy,
Mhm.
and then Qi is the Chinese or Taoist equivalent. So when you go to the acupuncturist, they're working with the flows of Qi in the meridians or the channels in the body. Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so both traditions recognize that there's information in the form of vibrate, which can be recognized as vibrational energy that flows around the body on the level of what's known as the energy body, the ether. So we have the physicality, and then there's an energy body around us known as the sometimes known as the aura. Also exists in the landscape as well, and those traditions have then had healing traditions, and method like things like yoga, for example, very well known for the Indian tradition. Also in the Chinese tradition, they had healing traditions, but they had a lot of the traditions that were to do with the body were based on martial arts, and they discovered ways to enhance the body to incredibly high levels, like the Shaolin Temple, and then that crossed over then with the Shaolin systems with Buddhism and also with Taoism, which is a bit like essentially like the Chinese version of yogis, and they were monks, and they through meditation and internal practices they recognized the way that the body worked in a very very fine way, and they're able to refine the bodies utilizing these energies to be able to achieve incredible things in meditation and physical things. And that flowed into martial arts, and then that allowed me then to work with the body, and that using this energy work I changed. I pretty much changed overnight, and I then discovered over several years of research this whole new environment and history of being able to work with design, but with the energy body of the earth in the same way that an acupuncturist would work with the energy body of a human. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
fascinating.
Hmm.
yeah. So like an acupuncturist will take a needle and put it in the body to then allow to basically allow stagnation to be relieved, to allow the flow to happen, because the whole point is so the body is in a constant state of balance and all the energy is flowing like rivers, like little tiny rivers. If they stop and they pull and they stagnate, the water gets dirty, and then when it's dirty and doesn't move, then that channel basically gets sick, and so that you can then have these different channels then relate to different organs and organ systems. So they recognize that all these different channels organs connect. My work's pretty much the same. So what happened is that in every tradition in the world, um, there were old nature traditions where cultures grew up on the land, close to nature. Their sensitivity to these energy flows was incredibly heightened. They had abilities way beyond most what you have today, because we've our sense organs have atrophied,
Mm.
like the pineal gland, and the whole body sensing has changed, and there's so many more influences, electromagnetism and chemicals and many things to actually that now block our ability to sense those flows of energy in the earth in the same way that you could then sense those flows of energy in the body. And those traditions, whether they're in Europe or China or Central America, they all recognized that there were currents and flows of energy in the earth in the same way that there are currents and flows of energy in the body. And these flows of energy, which have now been documented in the last number of decades, um, are in different forms. Some of them are waves of sound. Some of them are electromagnetic, and um, there are lots of different aspects to it. But essentially, this energy that's recognized in the earth, they recognized that where there were specific locations with higher amounts of this energy, then they could then heal themselves, for example. So for example, if there was a location of crossing where these energy rivers crossed, and there was water there, then it would become known as a holy well, and that energy would then vitalize the water, and that water would then become revered, and then there would then be the physical results. So people would drink that, and then they would then have effects on their health, or on their spiritual condition, or on fertility, and then over time, those locations were then connected with and revered, and then at a spiritual level, the spirits on the land were recognized to inhabit rivers and mountains and watercourses and trees, and all aspects of nature had individual spirits, and so there was an energy quality plus also a consciousness that went along with the physicality of that part of the landscape. And so that understanding, whether you're looking at the Native American tradition, looking in ancient China and in India, or the Celtic people in Europe, they all worked in the same way. And through that understanding and those techniques then developed into what we now know as the shamanic traditions, working with spirit and then connecting from the earth plane down into the underworld or into the heavens. And every tradition basically worked in the same way. And then what happened is, with that shamanic and spiritual understanding, the earth being this living energy body with its own many different energy structures, then as time went on, that knowledge then was then utilized in the building of new places, whether it's a place to give birth for fertility, a place to die, a place where you're going to cook food, a place where you're going to connect to your gods, or a place, or just where you want to live, or where the community is going to come together to do particular activities and rituals. And so different traditions then recognize those energies. Now then what happened is there was another layer to this, which is then they went, okay, now we're starting to understand what's happening on the land, and we can see the spirits, and we can talk to the spirits of the bears and the trees, and we're really part of that system. And then they started to recognize that the cycles of they looked up, and they looked at the planets and the star systems, and recognized the cycles that repeated over time. The day, the month, the year, the hour, and even bigger cycles. And you look at the Mayan tradition, they were able to look at cycles over thousands of years and recognize incredibly complex cycles, and then saw how those cycles, whether they're eclipses, the moons, and how all those different rhythms when they interconnected will then influence their physical space, or interact with themselves. And that's where we get astrology and the understanding of how the planets and in relation to ourselves and the earth can influence our own life and the way that we interact with the earth. So you've got all these different aspects going on. And then what happened was, then had groups of builders that then said, okay, well, we've got all this we've got this information about the land. Like, we can, if we go here, then we can get, we're really healthy, but over here it's not great. It's, we feel really bad over here. And we have the same thing. You might walk into a building and it just doesn't feel right. It's no different to someone who was in the land 5,000 years ago. And then they had this astronomical information. And okay, we've got an understanding of these cycles, and about looking at time, and then looking at the way that the planets moved, and that allowed them to then recognize and those qualities in the heavens, and then would then allow them to link that heaven cosmic information to how they lived, and they could then map time and then space, and then start to see, okay, our culture and my existence is then part of something greater, and so you had that technical aspect, plus then you had, okay, now we have Saturn and Venus, and we can then start to look at that spiritually as well. We could then recognize different deities and spiritual aspects within the heavens as well as the land. So essentially it became one big system. With all of that, then you're like, okay, let's build, let's build a temple to Athena, or let's, or Apollo is our god and we want to make him happy, so let's build an amazing temple to Apollo. And if we do that, and we have a place to go, and then we can give offerings there. And when we do that, or let's say Freya, or Zeus, whoever it is, you're going to give offerings because you want to connect with the qualities of that deity, and to, for, let's say you're going into battle and you want his blessings, or you want to be able to connect to that deity, which is a principle of nature that's very close to you, for fertility for the next crop, or you want a really healthy son to be born, any of those aspects. And so those places were then built in a very specific way with a very specific science that's utilizing the understanding of the earth, the understanding of the planets, to then connect them together. And then what happened is they started doing that, and they started to make amazing places to gather, places, temples. Sometimes they were nature spaces, like the Druids in Europe would basically use circles of trees, or they could be much more elaborate structures, like in Greece and Rome, the Parthenon, or the pyramids, in Central America or in Egypt, or pyramids that are all over Europe, or all over Europe and found all over Asia. These structures that then was places to observe the movements of time, places to connect the understanding of the earth and then the planets together. And then on top of that, then the understanding of science came along, mathematics and geometry, which is part of your question about shapes. So then it's how then they started to understand dimensions and measurements, and then allowed them to then connect the information of the planets with the earth through mathematics and geometry, and then build temples and Parthenons and pyramids in these places that would allow them to do something very specific, which is to connect heaven and earth. So that the rhythms of the heavens and the movement of the stars and the planets, and equally then the spirits of the gods, could then be grounded on earth and then connected together in very physical ways, to allow them to connect to their gods, and also to the earth as well, the earth mother, father sky, to then complete their existence, and then allow them to live and to have their spirituality rooted within their culture in the most fruitful way possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So these things are not arbitrary.
Nope, absolutely not. No, they did very specific jobs, and there's we can't go through all of them. Like in the Native American tradition, for example, there's I built something called a medicine wheel. The medicine wheel would do a particular job, and all these structures would balance the land. We actually what we're talking about here is not just these energies, but also we're talking about flows of geoelectric and geomagnetic currents. These structures actually, for example, actually balance the landscape. And so if you put a circle of stones on the ground, just a circle of stones, then particular things happen. So some of these energies will get attracted to it. So you asked about geometry. So the circle, that is the simplest form, just a circle. What happens when you make a circle? There's a particular energy quality in the middle that's created, and all the ancient traditions recognized in the center of a circle, the energy quality of the center is in resonance to the energy quality of gold. And so the symbol of the sun, it's a circle, but if you have a point in the middle, the circle with a point is the alchemical symbol for gold. So then we have a so alchemy being a science of transmutation, which is the forerunner to chemistry. So what we're getting to now is we'll talk briefly about mathematics and geometry. All of that ancient understanding then moved through into and then became the proto sciences, where alchemy predated chemistry, alchemical science, which was an understanding where we have a physical substance, and alchemy was about taking at its one level, taking lead and then turning it into gold. How do you actually do that? We have to then start to recognize that something physical, and I've got a crystal here, for example. This is a this is citrine, so this is a form of quartz. So this would have been recognized that this physical substance, as well as just having its physicality and the different atoms at the atomic level, but it also then has a soul as well. And so the alchemists recognized that as we have souls and spirits, so the planet does as well, but also that different aspects of materials can have that as well. And so what they would do, they worked with techniques of firing and breaking down the materials to then separate the elements and then creating transformation. And so what would happen then is that you then have this understanding of transformation. And in my tradition, that alchemical knowledge then moved into building. And I'll talk about that in a moment when we bring it all together, because there's so many bits to this. We're sort of doing, 10,000 years of sacred science in about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But there's huge amounts and incredible science. So go back to the circle, where there's a circle, and then what happens is you build that circle. Then that circle has an effect upon the land and different structures. So whenever you see these ancient structures, they're doing particular jobs. So if you take a circle and you put a cross in the middle, it becomes something known as the medicine wheel in the Native American tradition, is used in the Celtic tradition. It's called the Celtic cross. When you put a cross there, then it can represent the four directions. And that's then to do with the four elements, and there's layers of symbolism. But also what's happening is that it's then showing that symbols represent archetypes. So essentially a form, a shape, a circle with a cross in it, at an archetypal level, at a level of essentially the blueprint of life, almost like at the DNA level. That symbol, when manifested on the ground, can then represent something, where we're talking about symbolism, but also then, for example, it could then represent some medicine wheel would then represent and be a place where the worlds, where the different worlds would come together, and it'd be on a particular power point. So there's a lot of, so they would choose the center of the earth, understanding where the earth energies are, where they cross, put the symbolism there, and that then becomes a potent place once ritual is done there. So as intention and prayer and thoughts are placed into that place constantly over time, you're then able to then anchor information from and prayer and love into that place, which interacts with the earth energies and is then amplified by that structure and those symbols. So you have layers of archetypes, which is combined then with our desires and for manifestation. And we talk, there's a lot of talk now about manifestation and that the powers of manifestation, which is how the mind can then, our intentions can then be sent out into the universe. Where if you all the ancient traditions recognized that the universe was one structure, one organic living structure, so was the earth. And then they were then able to then work shamanically and be able to work and then allow themselves to integrate into those energetic structures at different levels. And so the physical place, that sacred space, for example, that medicine wheel, then was an anchoring place between those worlds, and that's where they would do ritual, and they would then tap the power of the land in that place, in the same way that you plug your PowerPoint, your socket into the wall to get the energy to charge your phone. It's just the same. So you choose your structure in the right place, and you take the Earth's natural energy, which can then lend energy to your practices for healing, for ritual, for connection to the land and to the spirits. So nothing was arbitrary, and so if we think about the medicine wheel in North America, or we look at much more complex geometries in the Greek tradition, the Roman tradition, and then into Pythagoras, and then to other traditions, they're all working with symbols and shapes that then are able to manifest particular energies, frequencies through their shapes. This becomes we could talk for like 20 hours on this, but I'm not going to. But essentially, this then flows into the understanding that shapes can then mimic and then manifest frequencies. This then becomes the foundation of the science of sound and harmonics, in the way that different shapes can then manifest sounds, and then those all those traditions, whether they're working with chanting, with singing, any sort of aspect where there's a group working together with sound. And if you've got a group of people working with particular sound frequencies, and let's say you're in a cave, or then let's say you're in an inner chamber of a pyramid, where the geometries those geometries of those spaces are able to generate and accentuate and enhance those sound frequencies occurring, you can then change consciousness, enhance healing, and then allow consciousness to then elevate through those structures. So you have an extremely complex and advanced science that then was focused upon the transformation and creation of frequencies, which would then basically work on the psyche and on the body and for healing. So whether it was to heal part of the body, could be within a sleep, within dreams, or then it could be at its highest level. The classic example is in the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and then what's known as the King's Chamber, as a room which is basically granite, and so it's a granite box, the middle quite high in the Great Pyramid. So granite, and it's like pink granite. It's one of the most piezoelectric materials on Earth. So what that means is, within the granite, in the material, you've got a lot of quartz, and that silica under pressure creates an electric charge. So you basically have a box with millions of tons of stone over it, keep putting the pressure on it, creating a particular charge and creating frequencies, and then a smaller box. And that smaller box, someone can get in that box and lie down and go into that box. And then that pyramid's on a very particular place on Earth, with incredible Earth energies and sound frequencies and water and many, many different things designed to be able to create frequencies. And you get into that box for 72 hours. It was called the temple sleep. And in that box, a prepared adept who had probably spent decades training to go into this high resonance chamber would then astral travel there, and then they'll be looked after by other high level priests, and then they would the spirit would go off, and then essentially they would die, and they would come back into the body, after the spirit being out for 72 hours. And this was like the culmination of that technology. And so that technology then was about the spirit being able to connect to the higher aspects of self, to the gods, but then to come back with wisdom, and so that's within a highly technical specific structure, the pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to do it in a cave, then you're going to do the same thing. There's a Europe in Europe, it's there isn't really much of a shamanic tradition known. But Pythagoras, who was, you remember from school, the Pythagorean theory, the mathematics triangle. Well, Pythagoras was actually um, uh, he's actually a priest of Apollo. So he was actually a shamanic practitioner, incredibly high level, and he had guys that are recognized as being philosophers, but actually were a guy called Empedocles and Parmenides. They're in his tradition, and they were actually shamanic priests who went into caves, and then people went into sleep, and then they would go off, and then they would get healed through their dreams. So the healing would then come from a technology that was to do with sleep within the astral level, but within a cave, and that cave structure is very particular as well. So the location of the cave, the sound frequencies created by the cave. So basically, you've got vibrational healing in specific spaces in a dark room environment. When the spaces are dark, whether you're inside a box, inside a pyramid, or you're inside of a cave, when it's dark, then what happens is after when it's pitch darkness, or you're in there for days. When you're in a dark room environment, then what happens is after several days, then you're not getting physical light, but then there can be changes to the third eye. What happens is that the pineal gland then starts to generate pinealine and harmaline and different compounds, melatonin, and it then starts to generate its own DMT. And then the molecules that will then you would normally see at death. Hence why within that dark room environment, you're then the spirit's then able to now travel. So essentially what we're seeing here is very, very specific structures, temples, but then designed for healing or for longevity or for the elevation of consciousness within utilizing very advanced building combined with the understanding of earth energies, combined then with these cycles, basically doing these practices the right time of the year and month, the moon cycles, the solar cycles, taking advantage of the energies from the planets, all they're coming together to then elevate the soul or consciousness or healing or fertility or all of those things at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. It makes me think of, well, if like a human, you have different organs, and so different part of your body will do different things. So then if the earth is a organism also, then different parts of the earth are for different things. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think what it is that all the ancient traditions recognize that was the earth was alive
Yeah.
and the universe was alive, but
Mhm.
then each tree and each lake and each mountain would have their own consciousness, and different traditions recognize those in different ways. And each of those, let's say you go to a particular waterfall, and you would then go there, and then there's at a physical level or an energetic level, we could then say there's a high level of negative ions there. We can have a negative ion, we can test for that. We can know the ion field there is then that negative charge is going to be highly beneficial. We go to the beach, we feel amazing, you know. We're getting we're getting the sunlight, we're in the water, all the negative ions, we're great. We come back to the city, the negative ion count goes down, and then basically we don't feel as healthy. There's we're not in the sunlight, and it's artificial lighting, and then all the different things that are basically we're in closed spaces, we're not out in nature. But more than that as well, if you're then able to move beyond that and find and then connect with the energetics of that place, the which is then could be recognized as like the vibrational aspect, like when I started talking about the energy within the channels. What is that energy of that place? And each one has a different quality. Some could be very, very powerful and really too much to handle. Some could be really soft. Some could actually be not great for health. they have, so the energies can vary or vary everywhere, and some of them can be good for us and not good for us. But if you go then to a specific place that's recognized to have a really beneficial inequality, like a holy well, for example, they can have different, they're not all the same, depending on the geology, depending on the quality of the water, but then also depending on the type of energies that are there. And then the higher aspect then would be they would then recognize, okay, we have a very particular spirit that's in that's alive and is the guardian of this place. And this then becomes, so this was then recognized. There's a whole group of uh, conscious entities known as the elementals. So we have the elements, which is the elements on the periodic table. But there were five classic elements: earth, air, fire, water, and ether, like space. And all ancient traditions recognized that within nature there were these there were aspects of these archetypes were then separated out. So there would be beings within the earth, or in water, or in air, and these then with someone that was suitably sensitive to these energies, and these consciousnesses could then connect with them. Sometimes they were beneficial. Sometimes they did not want to communicate with humans. In the same way that we think about, we have our own souls and our own spirits, aspects of the earth also had their own. So that there might be tree spirits that were very beneficial to work with. There might be then ones in fire that really we didn't really want to work with at all, because they're just really fiery and really grumpy, and they had different characteristics. And so all of this knowledge was recognized as well, and it was these spirits that were part of the land, as opposed to the spirits that were quote unquote angels, which were higher dimensional aspects of life, or higher dimensional aspects of the earth as a living being, that were more to do with the higher frequency. The ones that were on the earth, you could then work with them in different ways. And so if you then went to, for example, a particular spring and gave offerings, and then took the benefit from the water, and then over time those elemental beings evolved into local gods. So, for example, if you look at the Norse tradition, look at Freya, for example, or Brigid, or the different Celtic gods, they would have generally have begun sometimes as local spirits of the land, that then over time, through greater amounts of ritual and greater amounts of connection, and more people basically working with them, then could then become elevated into sort of minor deities. This is how the pantheon of gods would then develop. And sometimes they would then, others would then become like, the ancient tradition of Zeus, and these sort of rarefied, completely untouchable gods up there. But then at the lower levels, then they could be accessed. So rather than, okay, we want to work with the spirit of the planet itself, we could then work with different aspects. They're going to help us with the grain harvest, will help us with the water, help us in battle, those sort of things. So that was the way that they could then work with the earth. And then if they then said, okay, we want to then make a temple to Freya, let's put her here, because the energies here are really good, and when we spend our time here, we can really feel Freya, where it's actually there's earth energies. So then all of that understanding was allowed them to enhance their life. And I said before, the grain and all those sort of things, so that the different aspects of life were then able to be worked with, and that's what then became the science of them building with those energies. And now we've got energies of the earth, which is created to do with sound, or water, or faults, stuff that comes from physical things, or the earth's rotation, or the cycles. Then we've got the astronomical effects. Then the third one, then we've got these things which are sort of more like the consciousness of different places. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you talked about there were certain places for birth or death,
Mm,
based on the energies of the earth there,
mm.
um, it makes me think about hospitals, or like, how we relate maybe that knowledge to how we create these spaces for whether it's healing or birth or death or
Yep.
whatever it is.
So that's what I do. Essentially, I work with all these different things and then recognize their different frequencies. So if I wanted to basically build a hospital, I would work with specific frequencies and put in a specific place. Now, unfortunately, this knowledge we've talked about was basically has been forgotten. So that well, for example, the building you're in may have energies that are not conducive to life, or can then drain us in different ways. So there's all the different aspects of the energy body could then not be enhanced by that place. Then if you then apply a lot of electricity there and materials, you then basically we can then it's been recognized as modern buildings have been recognized then having sick building syndrome, that you go into, you're constantly in a place of work,
Mhm.
many layers of frequencies. Now we have high frequencies with EMFs, radio frequencies, 5G, all of these frequencies which are extremely fast and not in phase and not part of the natural construction of our physicality and the different layers of our bodies. You then basically can see how that all of those waves and all those frequencies can then affect health at one level. And so then if you're then wanting to have a place where a human can come out of a womb, you want, ideally it's going to come into a space that says not, because it's coming from a place, it's coming from like a womb, which is like this incredible structure that, that's and then it comes out into a space with lots of high frequency machines and
Mhm.
and artificial lighting. It's an incredible shock for a soul and that body to come out into, and that traditionally wouldn't have happened. It would have been the birth would have been in nature, and so then there was a natural flow, a natural movement into natural spaces, and so all of these things, and also you asked about shapes at the beginning, actually, like the different forms and shapes create waves. So all of this is to do with waves. Ultimately, the shapes, the spaces, that all of these are different frequencies that can influence life and the way that we interact with it. So if you're coming, ultimately, if the building is built with materials that can off gas chemicals, and all these things are artificial, if the shapes can create waves that are not harmonious, okay, we want, if there's a problem, we need to have the machine, a defibrillator, and there's machines that are going to help out. But ultimately, there's a huge amount of load of electromagnetic frequencies that are actually going to be quite a shock to the baby coming out. And so hospitals can be very challenging in terms of the energetic quality of their condition. So the baby's going to come out, but in terms of its energetic health, it's probably not the most ideal, as opposed to being born into a building that's made of natural materials without all those frequencies. And that pretty much is the same for all parts of the design. Where if I'm building or I'm helping to work with architects, we want the spaces to be as natural as possible, free of, as much as possible, free from the frequencies that are going to inhibit just living in the best way we can, or sleeping. Sleep's one of the big ones. Do a lot of work with homes and beds to make sure that where people are sleeping, to make sure the sleeping place is as safe as possible, and so you're not sleeping in locations that can be detrimental to health over time. That's coming from the earth, and also then with frequencies, from turn your don't sleep with your Wi-Fi on at night. Make sure your devices are out of the room. And make sure that you're getting complete blackout, so that you can then maintain the quality of the pineal glands, so the melatonin cycle is and the circadian rhythms can reboot themselves. So all those basic things, and again, it's all to do with frequency. So the design work is about understanding all of these energetic and frequency based influences upon life, and then how we can then protect spaces, whether it's being born or just living or just sleeping or anything in between, workspaces, creative spaces, and then how we can enhance them. How we can then go, okay, here's a really good place, but here's really bad. So let's not build there. Let's build here where there's really nice energy for that. And so all ancient traditions went, okay, here's really bad. We're not going to build there, but we're going to build here. And so 99.9% of buildings are not built in that way. They're just built anywhere, and it's usually to a cost. So then people ask me to come along and go, oh, our house is here, but it's really bad here. Okay, we can't move the house. Then how do we fix it? And then also that's one part of the work, basically healing the lands and healing the places. We heal the place, and then we can live more healthily, because our environment, without building, also then has a vibratory field in the same way that the human body does as well. It has those layers, and so the energies can get stuck. So if you've got lots of water, electricity, and then the frequency and different frequencies, and also the emotion aspects as well. In the same way that you go into a space, and they I don't know. Let's say it's a work environment, and it's the work the environment's a little bit toxic. It's not really the relationships are not great. All of those things, all of those things, those those emotions, those thought forms can get stored within that structure of that building, and then can contribute towards the overall health of that building. So, not only just that we can have light frequencies that are giving out a lot of red light, blue light, not red light. A lot of Wi-Fi, all these aspects. So basically, our buildings and the energy body of the buildings mimic our own energy bodies, the different layers, in the same way that if we hold on to anger or negative emotions for decades, the energetic aspect of that is then going to affect us. So, for example, in Chinese medicine, they recognize that the anger is then going to get stuck, is relinked to the lungs. So then if you're very angry and you don't resolve that trauma to do with anger, you can get lung issues down the line. At a greater scale, the same thing can happen in your building. So we need to then come in, and then I can then clear the thought forms, all those energetic layers. So the information, basically the information and vibrational patterns that get held within the building, we can clear that. Then we go, okay, where's a really good spot? Okay, here's a good spot, but this is bad. Let's clear and stop these frequencies coming from the earth. And then we go, okay, it's really healthy. And then if I'm working on a creative project where I'm designing, we can then design in the first instance with dimensions and shapes and forms that are going to enhance all those frequencies. Let's say it's for a natural birthing building where there's natural birth, or a creative studio, or a home. So we just layer up all of those things. I know there's an awful lot there, but we are working with millennia of knowledge, and it's now all the old stuff now going, okay, well, we've got all the old stuff. Also, we've now got radio frequency and EMFs and cell towers and all these other things to deal with as well. There's the things that they had traditionally to deal with from the land.
So how would you go about differentiating like a good place on the land from a bad place? Like, is it something that's measured, or is it like the frequency measured, or do you feel it, or?
There's several ways. Well, it all comes down to the body. So, do you know what dowsing is?
Yeah.
So, okay. So, like a dowsing rod. So there's one here. This is a very rudimentary one. So this is just a dowsing rod. So basically, it's like an antenna. So essentially, what happens is the body is incredibly sensitive, and so there are very sensitive people that can feel the energies and recognize the qualities of one place to another. Most people can't do that with their bodies, so they use a rod, or different versions or pendulums, different devices. Essentially, it's an extension of the body's energy field. And then when you move, and then it will then move and then give you a signal. So you then work. So essentially, you're training your body to be able to work with this device. But really, it's an extension of yourself. It's just like the way I just want to teach dowsing is with an old watch where their hands move. Essentially, when I walk along and I find water, I'm doing it. This is just showing the same way that the hands of a watch show time, but it's the gears inside that's doing the work. Does that make sense? Yeah,
Some
yeah,
way, yeah. I
yeah.
think
So,
so.
so essentially, like if you have a watch and the hands are moving, the hands showing the time, but it's the gears inside that are
Oh,
that are moving the hands. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So it's the
So this,
energy that's moving the dowsing rod. Is
yeah,
that what you're saying?
and yeah, it is, and it's actually it's us. It's the rod isn't doing. It's not sort of it's nothing mystical. It's just that we've mostly lost our sensitivity. We just need an extension, and this is something that will then respond to us. So we are doing it, and it's just that like that's I talked at the beginning. We used to have that ability, and then we sort of lost it. And so this is one of the ways for us then to then retrain. You
Like
use
training
this to,
wheels.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then over time you can then feel the body, and then some people can see the energies as well. And they can actually see, different levels, and then you can discern. And then there's a large body of knowledge which then has recognized the different qualities of energy flows, the different channels, different things. Some of these come from where rocks are, fault lines are. Some come from water, and some are grids. Some are like these lots of different things. You have to be able to then slowly over time you start to recognize these different structures, and then with those, then you go, okay, when these come together, it's not good, but when these come together, it's really good. And it's just a matter of then going, okay, not here, we're going to go there.
Hmm. Super interesting.
Um,
I
yeah, yep.
I saw somewhere that you have a way or know of a way to make free energy. Is that with like utilizing, I don't know, the Earth's energy, or am I am
Um,
I off here?
a little bit, and then well, there's there's well there's a lot of energetic. I mean, there are people who do that, um, and build devices. I don't do that.
Oh, okay.
Basically, I'm working with all of all of the Earth's energies at the level of something called the etheric or ether, or the energy level, which is a more refined level. Um, Again, like the level of prana or chi of the earth. Another aspect of that, or is then we talk about electricity and magnetism, which are related. Where there's an electric field, there's a magnetic field, and they work at 90 degrees to each other. So we are electric beings. The heart gives off an electric field. We are magnetic as well. And so the earth has very particular magnetic fields and electric fields. And so then when I'm working in landscapes and building structures, these different structures can then modulate the electromagnetic field. So for example, on Thursday, I was with a client and we put a big stick in the ground as an acupuncture point to earth acupuncture to release geoelectric current. So electric current caused by lots and lots of water, and this is then going to be a permanent release to then allow the electric charge of the earth to reduce. And she has horses there, and so immediately we got feedback because she's in telepathic communication with the horses. Quite amazing. And they told her that when we did this, the electrical charge of the earth dropped, and then there was less tension in their legs, so they could relax more. So that essentially is one way, in one of the ways we talked at the beginning. All these different structures, all those structures worked to then modulate and essentially bring balance to the environment. Now, some of these structures and some of these very advanced work, like pyramids, could be could be termed free energy because, well, free isn't it, or they were able to generate at different frequencies of energy. There are ways of doing that using ground current. So Nikola Tesla, who was the famous genius inventor, was able to then recognize how to use ground current to send signals. And so if you look at all of his work, essentially he had figured out how to do that, to send signals using the earth, but then his work was basically stopped, and then we ended up with a completely different system, and he could have done it for free. So that was a way of sending signals and communications in a way using the earth. And so he was the modern genius to tap into the ways that all the ancient societies and traditions recognize that. So instead of so he figured out technology then to be able to send information and signals and power to the earth. We then got a different way that came about because it was more financially viable to do it the other way, because his way was free. It didn't require payment or money. And no one wanted that because it wasn't profitable. And so the ancient traditions also did the same thing. So, for example, the Aboriginal culture from Australia, they would walk. They would do something. They would sing on the song lines. The song lines were the very big channels of earth energies, and they were able to communicate through these lines, and they were able to then sing. So again, constantly come back to frequency and sound, and they would then connect with different aspects of the landscape through song, and they were then basically using the energy. So these lines are there. There's people now. We've done experiments as well. Something called electroculture, which is utilizing electrical current in the air and in the ground using copper and shapes and coils to attract the charge to allow plants to grow better. We've done the same thing with pyramids. There's a very particular pyramid form we've worked with. And then when we put seeds in there, there's a particular current, and then the seeds grow a lot better. This is a huge area of work. There's a whole area of work we're looking at to do with towers that were made in Ireland. And then they've an amazing guy called Phil Callahan in the 60s discovered these towers, which are 40, 50 feet high. Basically, we were able to grab frequencies of the sun and then send these frequencies into the earth so the plants grow better. That is all. So that is a free energy device. It's grabbing energy, which are basically particular very high frequency waves of the sun through different types of stone, and then send it into the soil. So this is not a really complex device with loads of sort of electronics. This is basically understanding the materials and shapes. So actually going back to your very first question, like shapes, for example, a round tower, we talked about circles. You take a circle, you extend it, you get a tube, and then in particular shape, in a particular height, particular material in a particular place, you can then attract these frequencies, and your land's going to be great. Your crops are going to grow better, the soil is going to be better, and then you're basically going to have a better population. People are going to be happy. There was a classic book in the 80s where two researchers went to South America. They took their devices to measure electrical charge and some other devices. They went top of us in the pyramids in Mexico in the Mayan Peninsula, and they were able to measure very high particular frequencies and anomalies in the magnetic field. And then they worked out that then if they put seeds, then they replicated those conditions, the seeds grew better. And then they did an amazing piece of work. They looked at the records of the ancient cultures, Mayan and Aztec cultures, and other cultures that disappeared. The ones that had the pyramids, where the pyramids could then enhance the crop growth. Those cultures, their crops basically grew better, and the cultures lasted hundreds of thousands of years. The ones that didn't use the pyramid technology, their crops basically they weren't able to enhance their crop growth, and those cultures disappeared more quickly. So you can see how the understanding of the earth energies, understanding of these currents, these life-giving currents. So we're talking about what coming from the earth and the earth magnetic field. So magnetic cross lines, more subtle frequencies, and how these cross these locations were then impacted by the movement of the sun throughout the year. They could then basically get better crops, more health, more people who then live longer, and then people would be happier, and then they would then of course at the same time they're then working with their gods as well, but they're working then with devices that are able to then deliver them life-giving frequencies and energies. So
Mhm.
all of these things, so there was an incredibly high level of technology that was used through different cultures, and some of this knowledge came and went, but they were then, but they were, either we want to live better, we want to have better crops, we want to be able to heal here, or at the very highest level, we want to build a temple that's going to allow us to expand our consciousness and then move through death, and then allow ourselves to sort of live to much higher frequency, and gain spiritual wisdom and gain more knowledge about the universe, because we've maybe got to the extent of knowledge because we've done all the observation. How are we going to get more knowledge? We don't have Google. We can't. There's our books are limited, so we're going to go and get direct knowledge. We're going to then go into a state, then come back with more information about how what is the nature of life and the universe.
Hmm. Um, I've read, this might be a tangent, but I've read about the magnetic poles of the Earth shifting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, would that change this, or?
Yeah, well, I think those pole shifts over big cycles do create those shifts. Can affect everything. Absolutely. So over
Okay.
time, those pole shifts and the way that the actual locations of the poles are not just shifts but also movements. All of those things can affect everything. So in my work, I have to understand the difference between the magnetic north and true north. And if you're if you're trying to navigate around the Earth, you have to understand those coordinates of latitude and directions and sort of thing. So if you wanted to advance your culture beyond your country, you then had to understand all of those. You had to understand the movement of the planets, and then also the magnetic fields and those poles to be able to navigate, as well as your understanding how all those cycles influenced your culture, and then right down into okay, this year is going to be great for our crops, but next year is going to be great because of this or this. And some of those
Mhm.
then can be those shifts and those cycles. That's why you think about, we talk about the Mayan calendars. They then were able to understand the great and incredibly huge cycles. They could then predict what was going to happen, and predicting those cycles and predicting the changes gave them the advanced knowledge, gave them the understanding, forewarning before stuff happened. Like if an eclipse is going to happen, then you can go, okay, we know there's an eclipse going to happen like 4 o'clock in 3 weeks' time. You can then prepare for that because the effect of that eclipse is then going to have a particular effect upon the Earth's energy body and those things, and then how that affects our whole culture, because they were tapped into a much finer connection, but a much finer a quality of life, in which all the spiritual aspects, quote unquote, were as important as the physical aspects, because they would then look at they would go, okay, let's look at the clouds and the positions, and look at the formations of the clouds and the different what nature's doing, to be able to then take those cues to be able to recognize what's happening with the weather systems and the atmospherics and the magnetic field, those sort of things. They didn't have they couldn't turn on the news and then find out what the weather was happening. They had to use those information, and because they had such a heightened sense of connection, they were then looking at the physical aspects, but also feeling into and connecting with the non-physical aspects, which hence why then everything was always at these multiple levels. So if we know that, like, if we've got all this information, we can then plan are based on these huge cycles, and then we can build our temples to link to these different star systems, and then to bring them in. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, there are particular barrows which are big dome structures with long tunnels, and on winter solstice the light comes through there and gets right into that central chamber on one day of the year. The entire structure is then designed to bring the light of the winter solstice into that structure and to illuminate that chamber. So the movement of the Earth and the Sun is then used to then create a space in which the Earth is then linked to all those celestial events, which then and then so it's the sun, so the winter solstice sun basically illuminates that structure. And if you're in that place, and then it's a particular cavity, or you go to the hypogeum in Malta, internal structures where there's particular frequency, we keep coming back to the understanding that all of these structures are then built to then understand the cycles and how those frequencies could then basically enhance the culture. I mean, it all comes back to the same things. They're just using all their tools available just to basically supercharge, their lives and their knowledge and their wisdom.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's like in this conversation has made me feel very like hopeful or excited. Like I don't know, the way that humans can interact with life can be so interesting, and I don't know. Like a lot of things are done in very arbitrary ways, just yeah, like you mentioned, like because of cost reasons and whatever, and then you end up with like all this kind of unconscious action, and it just kind of breeds problems. But then like what you do is just such conscious, like intentional work that is utilizing understanding of like how, like what's going on, like how things actually work. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm very lucky to have studied in a tradition that has all this information. A lot of it's been lost. A lot of it's been the tradition I've studied in was almost disappeared, and it was being reconstructed into the 1960s. It was 1,000 years of knowledge that basically brought together the knowledge of the Arabic tradition with the Celtic tradition in France. And then for 1,000 years, that tradition built cathedrals and churches and places of power places. Then they stopped building, and then it was almost lost. And so there's one of the foundations of my work is a particular geometry. The earliest version of that is a place in Brittany. It's a rectangle made of stones on the ground, a very special latitude, and that's 4,000 years old. So that piece of information has been 4,000 years ago. What I'm working with today, has been recognized 4,000 years ago from observation. So we're looking at, really, it's just what's happening, and then some very clever people then worked out how to then map that information, to store it and work with it to create particular effects. It's a technology. It's extremely refined technology. It's just when you see it, you say, oh, it's just some stones. But actually, once there's an analysis of that, it then becomes basically equivalent to the quantum physics understanding for everything at the quantum tiniest level that we have today. It really was that the astronomer priests or the builders were the ones that could then have all of that knowledge then to build those places that then were fiercely guarded and protected. That knowledge was then fiercely guarded and protected and kept secret. So essentially, where you had, for example, the Catholic Church building and their structures, where people would come to then pray, but then there was a sort of recognition that you're praying to a higher force, and a high, actually above. But what's happening was they were then utilizing this very, very old knowledge of the cycles, of the earth energies, the materials and the forms that had been known but then the knowledge of that wasn't communicated. It was that it was used in a very quiet way to then make those structures resonating chambers, a huge cathedral with its particular shapes and forms. When you play the organ music, when the light comes in through the windows, all these the light frequencies, the sound frequencies, that particular structure is going to make you think, wow, that's an incredible visceral experience going into that. Not just it's wow, it's huge and incredible, and it's like the high architecture of its time, the biggest structures of its time. So it's awe-inspiring. So the emotional aspect, like your experience is like, my God, that's incredible. Actually, my God, literally, my God. That was
Yeah.
that was unintentional. That experience, but actually being in there with the sound, that structure was then created to then modulate consciousness through frequency, and then to support the word of God, and that was then communicated through the priests. That science is essentially everything I've been talking about in today, but it wasn't communicated, and it was then utilized for their own program, for their own desires, which was a particular to communicate a particular message. But then actually all this science we talked about today was about how all of this information can come from the earth and from the planets. And if everything is conscious and all of this is alive, that was opposite to what they were saying. So it wasn't said. Yeah, and so I think that that's then part. We get into a very big story then of the way that science and everything I've talked about, science of harmony and harmonics and sound, was known about and then was hidden. So this is like a big, big message. All of this was consciously hidden because it didn't fit with the message of the church. And so now we are living in a golden age in which this knowledge is now available again, where we can now use that knowledge to make places that are healthy where we can live in places that are healthy, places we can use that knowledge to build places where we can be born in the most natural environments possible, or we can create places, great places to meditate, or any of those things where that knowledge was unavailable for a long period of time outside of those particular structures. So I think that's why we're in an incredible time that all of these things are available to us, because they were kept secret. They were not let out. It was a high technology that was jealously guarded, in the same way that, let's say, Apple will jealously guard its programming or its data, the way that the iPhone works, what's the thing that, or the, I don't know, the recipe for Coca-Cola, like, those pieces of information, that basically are part of those corporate empires, was the same. And so I think what we're recognizing here is that this sound technology allows us to connect to the divine. If you have that knowledge, and you can go into a cave and do that, or you can then recognize, or you can do toning or chanting or mantra, or those different practices ourselves, then you didn't need to go to a church. So that's why it was really held down. And I think that we're in an amazing position to be able to use those and to enhance our lives.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm. Yeah, super
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and there's now we have we have YouTube, and the one and now people making amazing videos about sound and frequency and sacred geometry and all of these things. So there is a huge amount of information on that. I think it's incredible. We've there was like a new renaissance of the understanding of all of this, and about since the beginning of the 1970s. A lot of people then start to look at this again. Information that was pretty much sort of derelict in my tradition parallels that. So that was people looking at all the books again and doing research. And then my tradition was then resurrected through several generations of teachers, and the knowledge was brought back again, and new information was put into it, because it's a professional building art, taking all of everything talked about to be able to build in stone, to build stone circles and bioarchitecture and interiors and artworks on the land and different structures, to be able to enhance lives. But at the same time, we can then, have people doing amazing artworks and amazing research, and the confluence of sound and frequency, and some of that's for art, some of that's for healing, some of it's for technology, some of it's for, as you said, Sam, like, you said about free energy, all of these things. So all of this science basically applied in so many ways, and we're using it, to grow, make our crops grow better, and our plants, we have 1 acre of medicinal herbs, and making the seeds grow better. It's all really about how we can enhance life, and then at the same time, with this huge incredible storehouse of information that's all available to us. That wasn't. It was. It just wasn't. Even like, for example, there's a form called the Dodecahedron. It's a 12-sided shape. So basically, there were the square and the pyramid, tetrahedron, these shapes, these pure forms called platonic solids. And then, we can we just go on, you can look at them. Anyone, like, 2,000 years ago, the dodecahedron was completely secret, because essentially the Pythagoreans recognized this as being the form, the shape of the universe. And so, now we have this incredible information, that's available to us, that really shows us how life was formed, and at these archetypal levels. We can interact with them, in many different ways.
It's really interesting stuff. I guess if people want to learn more or dig into it, where can they find you?
Okay, so I have a website. It's Mark Leib, MarkLeib.com, and I offer. At the moment, I work in two specific ways. So they can go to about, and I do bespoke design, all the things we've talked about today. Designing projects from architecture, interiors, land work. That's one way, and then also in the about section, it says Home to Sanctuary, and that's an online program that I've created, which allows me to work remotely with people to then check people's homes out, and then to clear some of these energies that can be hanging around. We talked about before, the emotional level. I can then analyze the space remotely, and then find out where the good places and the bad places are, and then particularly in terms of looking at the bed and the bed health, and really then providing a lot of information and access to devices that are then going to be able to help us live and really raise the vibration of our homes. That's called Home to Sanctuary. And if any of your listeners are interested in that, then they can message me and say that they've watched the podcast today, and they'll get 10% off of that service. And so that's something I do remotely. So it's two different ways of working, and sometimes I can do design as well remotely. But essentially, these are the two ways, because like not everyone has a project to build. Everyone has a place to design or create, but we all want to have our living space as healthy and as protected and balanced as possible. That's Home to Sanctuary.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening.
See you next week.